As we continue with Wednesday nights with myself, Inayet Wadee, and the world is in shock. The media world is in shock. Al Jazeera, their media network is in shock, and this is the blatant murder, a violation of international laws and norms, and this is the brutal murder of Al Jazeera senior correspondent Shireen Abu Akleh while she was on duty in Jenin this morning, and it is clear that she had a jacket that identified her as a member of the press, and she still was shot in the head. She was murdered, and the Israeli authorities obviously have been targeting a number of journalists, and also Al Jazeera producer Ali Al-Samoudi was also shot in the back while covering the same event. And this is what we are going to be focusing on in the next hour. We are going to be talking with Khalid Ameyreh, award-winning reporter from occupied West Bank in Palestine. We've got Yumna Patel, Palestine news director. We've got Professor Swart, visiting professor at Wits University and former producer at Al Jazeera. And it is clear that Al Jazeera is in shock. And before we get to our guests, we are going to obviously play out a clip and just to look at the reaction of the staff of Al Jazeera as they were watching the footage of their colleague being shot. So let us start off by just taking a minute to take a look at this clip before we get to our panelists this evening.
We're here in Al Jazeera's offices in Ramallah, where if you can see the colleagues of Shireen are gathering. There are journalists also here coming. Everyone is looking at this video that shows the last moments of her life. She's been shot while she was covering the Israeli raid in Jenin. And if you will pay attention to that video, I'm not sure if you can see, but even as she was shot, and you will see someone coming in now trying to pull her from the scene, the gunshots continued. So it was really difficult, even if she had a chance to make it, it was really difficult to pull her, to get her the help she needed. And shortly after, she succumbed to her wounds in the hospital.
Nida, one can understand, forgive me for interrupting you. One can understand, because we've heard from Stephanie how tightly knit these teams can be, how much like a family these teams on the ground can be. Try, if you can, just talk to us what kind of impact this is having on the team.
I think the pictures are speaking for themselves, right, Rob?
Yes, clearly those pictures speak volumes when one looks at the emotions, the reactions, the last minutes of the life of Shireen Abu Akleh. And we're going across now to be joined by our panelists, Khalid Ameyreh, Yumna Patel, and Swart, to unpack this tragedy that has happened. And I see right top of the screen, I do see Khalid Ameyreh. Khalid, welcome to the show. Assalamu alaikum. If you could unmute your mic, please, Khalid. There we go.
Okay. What did he say?
Yes, welcoming you to the show. We do appreciate you taking time out and joining us on the panel this evening.
Thank you very much indeed.
And also to you, Swart, wonderful that you're able to join us, and Yumna Patel as well. And it is clear, Khalid, and I'm going to start off with you, that this is a sad moment. It's a tragic moment. And Shireen Abu Akleh was no ordinary correspondent. She was a senior correspondent. And this blatant murder, this brutal murder, clearly we've seen in the clip, we've seen what is done to the journalists, the Al Jazeera journalists, the shock that they've expressed, the emotion, the reactions, and just your reaction at this brutal murder that has taken place this morning.
Well, I was really shocked because You see, no catalog of the evil Israeli occupation can be complete without a special chapter or at least a special paragraph about this heinous, this nefarious act by the Israeli occupation. In fact, I believe that this crime embodies, encapsulates, and in a way epitomizes the brutality of the Israeli occupation ever since 1967. This is how I view this despicable crime, which is very characteristic of the Israeli occupiers all along.
Yes, and Mia Swart, I'm just looking at some of the tributes that have been pouring to journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, and in her own words, where she says, I chose journalism to be close to the people. She said in a video, it might not be easy to change the reality, but at least I could bring their voice to the world. And this is exactly what she was trying to do today in Jenin, to bring her voice to the world, not knowing that these are going to be the last moments of her life. And you being involved, obviously, with Al Jazeera as well, and I'm sure you equally shocked. But happening to a person, a correspondent like Shireen Abu Akleh, who's given so much of her life to journalism and to bring the reality of the horrors of Palestine to the world.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, Khalid, sorry, I would just like Mia to obviously, I'll get back to you in a minute.
Yes, well, I think that her words are important where she said that at least the voices must be heard, because she must have been very aware of how difficult it is to get, real international action by the international community, or any form of accountability in place. So what journalists can do is to give people a voice, and this in itself is very powerful. This is a powerful form of activism and resistance, and that is why it is particularly sad when someone who has been as passionate as she was is killed.
Well, thank you. And we'll also like to get your reaction, Yumna, and some of the issues that I've obviously posed with both Khalid and with Mia as well. And what has happened, obviously, today, the world is in shock. I'm sure you've been in shock as well. But looking at, the brutality, and one can only call it a blatant murder and a violation in every sense of the word, Yumna.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Palestinians, all of Palestine is just in total shock. People woke up this morning to the news that Shireen had been killed. She was killed in the very early morning, as her and her team were reporting on an Israeli raid in the refugee camp, in Jenin refugee camp. Shireen is a seasoned veteran and seasoned journalist. She's well aware of the situation on the ground. She's been reporting in Palestine for more than 20 years. She's been a reporter for Al Jazeera for more than 20 years. So people are just totally shocked. I mean, when I've been talking to my Palestinian colleagues and friends here, everyone is just in total disbelief. One of my friends was saying that, when they were kids, they grew up watching Shireen Abu Akleh on the screen, and as a game that they would play as kids when they would pretend to be on TV, is that they would do her sign off when she would sign off from her reports and say Shireen Abu Akleh reporting from wherever. And this was something that Palestinian children used to do when they would pretend to be on TV growing up. So it just shows, truly how important Shireen was frankly, as an icon in Palestine, and how devastating today is for Palestinian journalists, obviously for Shireen's friends and family and her colleagues, but of course for all of Palestine as well.
Yes, and also Khalid, I've seen some tweets, and there are people that are saying that they cannot find words to describe this brutal crime against a beautiful and a kind woman who acted as a voice for the voiceless for over 2 decades. And she was obviously unwavering as far as her commitment was concerned, her bravery, and she showed a lot of integrity. And how well did you know Shireen Abu Akleh as we pay tribute to her tonight?
Well, I knew her very well, actually. She was very much dedicated to conveying the truth, only conveying the truth to the outside world. And this really make the Israelis very upset, and that's why they sought to silence her forever. I mean, the Israelis committed this crime in order to achieve two criminal goals. The first, to intimidate Palestinian journalists and cameramen and photographers, and to convey a message, a tacit message to them. That message states that you have to choose between conveying the truth or saving your life, and you cannot choose both. The second goal was to prevent the truth from getting conveyed to the outside world. The Israelis really worry very much about their real image reaching people outside the world. I mean, the truth which Shireen Abu Akleh sought and managed to convey to the outside world, caricatured portrayed the Israelis as they really are: child killers, brutal occupiers, and so on. So the Israelis were very angry, and that's why they sought to silence her forever.
Yes, and Mia, as Khalid mentioned, that silencing her forever, because we knew that, and she knew it as well, that conveying the truth could cost her her life. And on many an occasion, being on the front line, the dangers were there. Israeli bullets, tear gas, bombs, invasions, curfews, these were there all the time. And knowing that at some point in time she would become a target, once again, she was relentless in her pursuit to do what she needed to do, and that is to bring the truth and the reality of Palestine and what is taking place in Palestine.
Yes, this is true, and the same goes for many of her colleagues in the West Bank and Gaza. We know also that this is not new. That about exactly a year ago, Al Jazeera's offices in Gaza were bombed and destroyed completely, and that there was no accountability or follow up for this action. And shortly after that, another Al Jazeera journalist was arrested. So this is definitely part of a long series of actions and atrocities by the Israelis when it comes to how they treat journalists and free speech. I just think that the important question is what can be done. Because this is a very difficult question, but this is what one needs to ask.
Yes, and also, Yumna, we know that Shireen was an inspiration to many. She inspired generations, and for many Palestinian children as well, through the intifadas as well. And I'm sure you knowing what she has achieved, what she was capable of as well. She was truly an inspiration to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Shireen was, as we've expressed throughout this discussion, and people have been sort of talking about all day, is that she was truly an inspiration and a fierce voice for the Palestinian people, for her people. She inspired many young journalists, young generations of journalists, and even people today reporting in Palestine. So it really is devastating that she was killed, and that she was killed in this way. And if you've seen the videos of what happened this morning, she was killed. The journalists next to her, even some young Palestinian civilians next to her who were trying to retrieve her body, when they tried to get to her, they were also shot at by Israeli snipers. And even after the fact, the Israeli government has continued to deflect and sort of attempt to reassign blame and deny responsibility for the killing of Shireen. So the whole situation is very devastating and upsetting as well. That we already see things sort of unfolding in the way that they always do, which is that Israel kills Palestinians with impunity and with total lack of action and accountability on part of the international community.
Yes, and also Khalid, I think just following off from what Yumna has mentioned in terms of Israel and Israel taking responsibility, we've seen a tweet come through from the Prime Minister Bennett talking about her death and saying that information they had gathered, it appears likely that armed Palestinians were firing indiscriminately at the time, and they were responsible for this unfortunate death of the journalist. Now, clearly, this is an insult. This is an insult to the people of Palestine when a tweet of this nature comes out, and particularly from someone who is the prime minister of a country. If you could unmute, please, Khalid, sorry.
Yes. I think mendacity has always been and will always be Israel's modus operandi in dealing with the outside world. The Israelis sought to murder the messenger precisely to kill the message. They don't like the message which our sister Shireen Abu Akleh was trying successfully to convey to the outside world. I mean, journalists, professional journalists like her, really convey to the outside world the fact that the Israelis are the Nazis of our time. I am saying that because in the final analysis, when Zionists or Israelis think and behave and act like the Nazis did, they become Nazis, pure and simple. So the fact that Mr. Bennett has been indulging in all kinds of lies, I mean, this is what they always do. This is not the first time he lies. I think lying is an integral part of being a Zionist. After all, Zionism from its very inception was based on a lie, a land without a people for a people without a land.
Certainly. And also, Mia, just looking at it for a media organization like Al Jazeera, and we know Al Jazeera has been a target in more than one instance. You have mentioned incidences in the past as well, but also looking, just at journalists in particular. We've seen the shock in the faces of her colleagues at Al Jazeera and your involvement in the organization. And just to try and understand or paint a picture of what could be happening at Al Jazeera at this moment, and also in terms of the reaction to this brutal murder.
Well, we've seen throughout the day that there's been continuous coverage, and this will continue. We've also seen that Al Jazeera has been calling for an investigation and has also, published calls by the EU and even the State Department for an investigation. The question to me is just whether Israel will take part in that investigation, whether that's inevitable, in which case it will probably be a whitewash. I think that in this case, it's very important to stick to facts. I think it's part of Al Jazeera's philosophy, is to bring the facts to the people. So I don't think it's necessary, with all respect, to use words like Nazi in this case. I think that the facts in itself are severe enough and are shocking and sad enough, and one needs to look at constructive ways of going forward and persuading the international community that steps need to be taken. We've seen UN fact-finding missions that have been fairly effective in the past. I'm referring particularly to the one into the Gaza war of 2014. So I think that looking at these kinds of measures, as much as one has reason to be skeptical as well, could be constructive. But I think the media in itself can play a very important role. And Al Jazeera has shown that today, that to get the news out, to get the facts out, to get the pictures out, the videos out, yes, this is important. One should not slide into name calling, because then I feel that you are approximating Israeli disinformation if you start just using words like Nazi, etc. I don't think that's necessary, even for this kind of conversation.
Thank you for that. And Yumna, just following up from what Mia is saying, and we're talking about Al Jazeera saying that they hold the Israeli government and their occupation forces responsible for this killing, but also at the same time looking at the international community, because this is where the call has gone out. It's gone to the international community to condemn, and also at the same time to hold the Israeli occupation forces accountable for this intentional targeting of Shireen Abu Akleh.
Yeah, I mean, there's been lots of calls on the international community and third-party states to hold investigations into Shireen's killing, and to also, I guess, hold Israel accountable. But again, it's not very often that that the international community or third-party states actually respond to those calls. I mean, literally, I can say in my own experience reporting from Palestine, I mean, almost every single story that I write, there are Palestinians who are being displaced from their homes, Palestinians who are being thrown in prison, Palestinians whose children are being killed. I mean, almost every single story I report on, Palestinians are calling out to the international community to do something and to hold Israel accountable. And when we see these sorts of stories and these sort of high-profile killings, like we've seen with Shireen, for example, we'll see statements maybe from US or European government representatives, but at the end of the day, it's all just lip service when these same states continue to support Israel financially and in every sense of the word on the global stage. So up until now, I mean, the reason that Israel's occupation has been able to sustain itself for so long, and the reason why now Israel, as human rights groups have called it, Israel's apartheid regime has been able to sustain itself for so many years, is because of total lack of action and accountability from the international community. Israel is allowed to kill Palestinians, journalists, children, unarmed civilians, etc., with total impunity. So as long as this continues, I don't think that any sort of like empty statements or calls for investigations per se from international bodies is actually going to lead anywhere.
Yes, and Khalid, while this continues, Israel will continue acting with impunity, and they will continue with their work. The brutality against the people of Palestine, their human rights as well. And also at the end of the day, even if a statement does come out, all Israel will say is this was possibly a mistake, but they will not be held accountable. And this is the critical question as to why Israel is not being held accountable. We know we have the likes of the United States of America who will always protect Israel. They will say that Israel has the right to defend itself. And at the end of the day, ignoring this crime, this brutal murder of Shireen, and also generally the crime against humanity against the people of Palestine.
Yes. Well, actually, I cannot give Israel or the United States the benefit of the doubt. The United States and to some extent some countries in Europe are part of the problem, not part of the solution. That's why really we have to switch from the official front to the people's front. Israel doesn't give really any, it doesn't care about reactions from Arab capitals or from other capitals as well. Israel relies first and foremost on the United States, and the American hypocrisy and moral duplicity transcend reality. That's why I just cannot give them, I cannot count on them for any modicum, any semblance of justice for the Palestinians. But we have to leave no stones unturned. We have to do the impossible in order to really mobilize the people's front, ordinary people, as well as journalists, as well as intellectuals, people who would really make an impact in exposing the evil nature of the Israeli regime.
Yes, certainly. And we are also, when one looks at the life of Shireen Abu Akleh and what she represented, and when one looks at the women of Palestine, the bravery of the women of Palestine, the defiance against the brutality and the injustices over 7 decades. I'm sure she represented a lot, and particularly for women, for girls, where she represented this model of defiance against this type of brutality and also violence that women have been subjected to in Palestine for a very, very long time.
Yes, and another inspirational Palestinian activist, Khalid Ameyreh, was commenting on her death today. It's also clear that she was there's been 12 Al Jazeera journalists killed since 1996, and she's the first woman. So this would have enormous importance, and also, she would be sort of hailed as a martyr, as a hero within Palestine, and this would, probably be elevated to an important symbolic level. I just wanted to add that there is of course, an ICC investigation. A preliminary examination has been started into crimes committed by Israel. And there are now renewed calls that this should be probed again and more strongly. And as much as one might be skeptical of a fact-finding report or an investigation, this could be additional material for those, pursuing this at the ICC. So I also share the skepticism that the US would do anything or would be constructive in any way. And I have no doubt that Israel would be obstructive, but these reports still have some value. One cannot abandon it altogether.
Yes, Yumna, and also I'd just like your thoughts in terms of what I've just asked Mia with regard to her being a model of defiance, particularly for women, the inspiration that she has been, for young girls, for women. And we've seen over a period of time, we've seen what has happened to the women of Palestine in their defiance against Israeli occupation. Shireen Abu Akleh is one. Another name that comes to mind is Rana Ayub, out in India, who has also been very, very vocal. And obviously, this means a lot with Shireen being the first Palestinian martyred journalist who has been martyred. And I'm sure for many other women, many other female journalists right across the entire world who are right in the front line where all the oppression and brutality of occupation is taking place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything you said is definitely true. According to the Palestinian Journalist Syndicate, since 1967, which is when Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, they estimate that around 86 Palestinian journalists were killed since 1967, the majority of which were killed after 2000. So it's estimated that since 2000, which was at the beginning of the Second Intifada, around 50 Palestinian journalists have been killed, and unfortunately, of course, that includes Shireen. In the years that I've been reporting on Palestine, I've reported countless stories of Palestinian journalists, both men and women, being targeted by Israeli forces more often than not, while they're clearly marked as press. In 2018, I believe, a young Palestinian journalist named Yasser Murtaja was killed in Gaza while he was reporting on the Great March of Return protests on the Israeli border with Gaza. And Al-Haq, a leading Palestinian human rights organization, actually found that Israel was deliberately targeting Palestinian journalists with live ammunition who were covering the protests in 2019. Even in the cases when Israeli force against Palestinian journalists is not lethal, it can often be life-threatening or even cause lifelong disabilities. I mean, in 2019, a Palestinian journalist, Mu'adh Amarna, was shot in the face with a rubber-coated steel bullet, and that caused him to lose his eye. So there's so many stories of Palestinian journalists, men and women. We saw Palestinian journalists, young women, being targeted while they were covering the events at Al-Aqsa not too long ago during the month of Ramadan. So again, this is a tried and true tactic of the occupation and of oppressive regimes all around the world, is when you oppress the media, when you oppress the voices that are telling the true story of what's happening on the ground. That's how you can continue to maintain domination over a group and over a people.
Yes, and also Khalid, just looking at the reaction in Palestine itself, and I've seen certain visuals as well, in Ramallah as well, and just looking at Shireen and what this actually means for the people of Palestine and their struggle.
Well, yes, the situation is very incendiary, very volatile. Everybody is shocked. There is lots of indignation, and many people predict that there will be a kind of an intifada or something like that, because the situation is very ominous, to say the least, and people believe that this is a turning point. This is a turning point, and the situation before the murderous killing of Shireen Abu Akleh will not remain unchanged after that. So really, everybody is waiting for something to happen, and the tension, the anger. I haven't seen something like that since the first and second intifadas. So really, we have a very volatile situation, and everybody is indignant about what happened.
And also, Khalid, I just want to quote you on one of your tweets where you speak about the world being mobilized to help the Ukrainians. What about the Palestinians? And this is where you raise the question, Are they children of a lesser God?
Yes, indeed. This is how the Israelis are viewing the Palestinian people. That's why they murder people indifferently. They just don't care. They believe that the lives of Palestinians are worth less than those of Jews and other people. This is why they believe that they will get away with impunity, and they might be correct about that, because the United States is guaranteed, and the Jewish lobby is controlling the United States government, and that's enough for Israel and for the Israeli government. The Israeli government is not committed to any moral considerations vis-a-vis the Palestinians, and this is the reason that the Israeli public opinion is very indifferent, very apathetic about the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. I haven't seen many Israeli intellectuals and rabbis, people like journalists and so on, expressing any modicum of solidarity with her or with the Palestinians, because our lives do not count, because we are children of a lesser God. This is how they view us. They do not say that openly and publicly for fear of a public relations disaster, but actions speak louder than words.
Well, certainly, and also, Mia, just as far looking at how the world was mobilized as far as Ukraine is concerned, and I've got a tweet that has come through and says, now more than ever, to honor the legacy of martyrs like Shireen, we must mobilize to hold Israel accountable for its crime against humanity, its occupation, its apartheid, its genocide. Justice requires accountability. Yeah, again, we're talking about a mobilization for a cause like the world was mobilized with Ukraine recently.
Yes, I just think that this is very unlikely in light of the fact that the major powers that are supporting Zelensky are very unlikely to publicly speak out against Israel. I cannot really see this happening, and I think that the Israelis, probably preempted it all by saying that she was killed in an exchange of fire. This was what Bennett said almost immediately afterwards, as well as the Israeli army chief, that there was this exchange of fire, and that she was killed by radical Palestinian groups. So they had their story ready, which obviously indicates that it was done in some sort of self-defense, or that it wasn't a targeted killing, which is extremely unlikely. So it seems like that they are very well prepared for the criticism that's going to come their way. And yeah, my sense is that in the United States, this is not going to be a big story, and that this will in no way measure up to, it will in no way, get the kind of attention that the Ukrainian war is receiving, which isn't right.
Well, certainly, Mia, and also Yumna, while we are talking about the media and referring particularly to the mainstream media and the media fraternity in the mainstream media, we're talking about the powerhouses. And I'm sure that, as they normally do, we would find some sort of a spin after this murder of Shireen Abu Akleh coming in the mainstream media. And this is the reason why we rely on alternative sources of media, social media, and the like to tell the true story. And also at the same time, looking at mobilizing civil society. And this is where alternative media, particularly at a time like this, should be relentless in their efforts to make absolutely sure that the truth comes out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we saw almost immediately the way that the Western media and sort of mainstream media organizations in the US, for example, sort of tone down their language when it comes to the killing of Palestinians and Palestinian journalists versus, for example, the killing of Ukrainian civilians or journalists by Russian forces. Oftentimes, when the media talks about how Palestinians are killed, they talk about it in the passive voice, which means, they talk about Palestinians dying or Palestinians being hit by gunfire or being hit by bullets, but never actually saying Israel killed a Palestinian. Israel is responsible for killing this Palestinian journalist. What was quite shocking, but also maybe not surprising to see today, was how quickly mainstream media and sort of Western media outlets that are supposed to be the sort of beacon of journalistic standards and what people should be, journalists should be aspiring to do, almost immediately these mainstream news organizations started essentially just regurgitating like the talking points and stuff of the Israeli military and the Israeli government, and taking what was clearly a propaganda attempt by the Israeli government to change the narrative, taking that as fact and essentially ignoring several eyewitness testimonies from journalists who were there at the scene. And that was what was wild, was that as we are supposed to be trusting the words of journalists, right? And when a journalist tells us something, we take it as fact, we take it as the truth. But all of a sudden, that's not relevant anymore, apparently, when it comes to Israel. Video footage, live, video footage of the shooting was not enough. Countless testimony of eyewitness Palestinian journalists who were there was not enough. And, these media outlets, unfortunately, just fell back into the same pattern of regurgitating the same old Israeli talking points.
Yes, certainly. And also, Khalid, looking at the killing of Shireen also, and what it actually illustrates for Palestinians and Palestinian journalists in particular, the dangers that they are faced with when doing their jobs, whether they're in the West Bank, whether they're in Gaza or inside of Israel itself. If you could unmute, please. There we go.
Yes, I believe that Palestinians should call the spade a spade, especially when we see the proverbial implement in the hands of our grave diggers. And I am not speaking metaphorically. We should not wait until something uglier and more brutal happened to us. Zeev Sternhell, the late Jewish intellectual and Holocaust survivor, compared Israel today with Nazi Germany in the mid 1920s and early 1930s. So we have to call the spade a spade. I am not saying that Israelis are introducing Kristallnacht or Auschwitz or Treblinka or Mauthausen in the occupied territories, but lots of evil things had happened before the Holocaust. We must not wait until these things happen, because then it might be too late.
Well, certainly. And also, Mia, I think what is encouraging to note is the status of Shireen Abu Akleh and the high regard that she was held with in Palestine, to the extent where we've now learned that a state funeral procession will be held this Thursday in her honor, departing from the presidential headquarters. the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas will be in attendance. And, this obviously is a fitting farewell to someone who has done so much, who has contributed so much, and who has meant so much to millions of Palestinians and people across the world.
Yes, it's going to be interesting to watch her funeral. And the events of the next days, I expect it be mass mobilization. I just, wanted to add that I think the fact that she was on Al Jazeera Arabic meant that, she was obviously not a household name in the English-speaking world, such as Christiana Amanpour, or, what would be the equivalent of a very influential, Western female journalist. So this is unfortunate that those journalists who put themselves in the most dangerous positions, as she has, and has been so fearless, possibly don't get the recognition that she deserved because she was reporting in Arabic.
Very, very interesting. In fact, that's something that one needs to consider, Mia, in fact, with what you just said. Now, Yumna, just, looking at many of us who are outside of Palestine, many of us that are involved with media organizations, and just to honor somebody like Shireen Abu Akleh, what should we be doing? Because we know we're not going to get that honor or coming through from the mainstream media or the media powerhouses, which I'd like to call them. But just looking at people, looking at civil society, looking at activists, organizations right across the world. We've got many organizations that identify with the Palestinian cause, Palestinian solidarity organizations right across the entire world. What should we be doing to honor Shireen Abu Akleh as a martyr?
I guess. Oh, okay. All right.
Did you want to go say something, Mia?
No, I just wanted to say that it would be good if there's obituaries worldwide, proper, lengthy, informative obituaries across the board. And if, this kind of program that you've been hosting, this should be happening, and there should be scholarships in her name and programs in her name, I think that there's still a chance to get her name out, even if, as I said, it's not a household name, hasn't been one. Sorry, Yumna.
Yeah, I would just digress, though. Just because she's not a household name, perhaps in Western households, does not mean that she didn't. Just because someone's not recognized by Western media doesn't mean that they didn't get any recognition. She was a household name across the Arab world and across Palestine, and has surely achieved a level of recognition that many Western journalists actually have never achieved. So I think it's important to note that. And I would say that to go back to your question about maybe ways that people can honor Shireen would just be to continue to share Palestinian voices, share Palestinian stories, urge whoever they can, whether it's their governments, media outlets, etc., to report the facts and to hold Israel accountable for its human rights violations and for its crimes. That at the end of the day, I believe, was what Shireen was trying to do through her work and her tireless efforts over the decades, was to bring the voices of Palestinian people to the world. And she was definitely successful in doing that. So in order to honor her memory, people should continue to lift up Palestinian voices and support Palestinian journalists, and continue to bring attention to the attacks that Palestinian journalists and Palestinians are facing on a daily basis.
Yes, I think we've got about 3 minutes, and I'm just going to go around the panel, give you 1 minute each, basically, just some final thoughts, starting with you, Khalid Ameyreh.
We have to convey a special message to the Arab world that, and to the outside world as well. We have to tell them that the occupation is an act of rape, and it has got to stop. Period.
Thank you for that, Mia. Final thoughts?
Yes, I just wanted to add to that and say that if it weren't for the occupation and the raids in Jenin, she wouldn't have been there, and the killing wouldn't have happened. So it all begins and ends with the occupation.
Thank you for that, Mia. And finally, Yumna Patel.
Yeah, I would say maybe something that's more relevant to maybe perhaps the South African audience is that over the past year, more and more human rights organizations have come out and accused Israel of the crime of apartheid and said that Israel, although maybe different to the apartheid system in South Africa, Israel is now guilty of the crime of apartheid and should be treated as such. And so people should be working towards making that reality known and accepted, I think, across the world, so that hopefully one day maybe something could change.
Well, Yumna, Patel, Mia, Swart, and Khalid Ameyreh, we certainly do appreciate you taking time out, being part of this panel discussion with us this evening here on Salam Media. We wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of a much needed panel discussion. Particularly, it is fresh, very, very fresh. The murder of Shireen Abu Akleh took place this morning in Jenin while she was on duty. And we've seen condemnation come through from Al Jazeera. We've seen condemnation come through from a number of other organizations. And it is a heinous crime and aimed at one thing, stopping the media from conducting their duty, and more importantly, to hold the Israeli government and the occupation forces responsible for the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. And Al Jazeera has extended its sincere condolences to the family of Shireen in Palestine and to her extended family right across the entire world. We at Salam Media do exactly the same, and we will continue when we talk about humanitarian journalism. We will continue covering stories like these as and when they occur. And clearly, we are all saddened, and he is going to obviously be a huge loss to journalism in Palestine, and also at the same time, the inspiration that she has brought to many people who have heard her, who have watched her, and those that look up to her as a role model. So our thoughts go with Shireen Abu Akleh and her family and the people of Palestine. The time is just gone 9 p.m. It's time for me to sign off. Once again, it's been a pleasure being in the company of our listeners, our viewers here at Salam Media. We wish you all the best. Please take care. Assalamu alaikum